Breaking Bad / Game of Thrones / Walking Dead not review. Or the joys of missing the boat and living in a spoiled world. Now this is not going to be a full review of all 3 shows since that would require Rua TCHing and I've yet to go through Better Call Saul. What this is instead is my experience watching all 3 TV shows during 2022/3 years after relevancy and the impact of cultural expectations I had of these shows from my time around uni 2012/15 where these shows peaked in popularity and having posters of TV shows was to be expected instead of now being derided since showing any positive affection or merchandise of popular culture makes you dreaded consumer. Spoilers throughout but not massive ones and discussions of various themes of those shows violence. And on the case of spoilers I remember many years ago there was discourse around spoilers in both regards that whether you can enjoy a product fully despite already having the ending spoiled and the ethics of reviewing media and mentioning spoilers for those who have yet to watch it and some extended discourse about how the nature of not wanting to spoil plot to people is undermining critical discourse that's needed to fully talk about a TV/film and film Twitter is just terrible. I feel a large part of the spoiler discourse has now vanished because people have accepted due to the breakneck speed of online consumption that if you don't actively seek to watch something straight away then the expectation of being spoiled is now just part of it. The focus on spoilers, or to tell a story ending, was also overhyped since in media it is often the journey and not the destination and you can't spoil great acting or filmmaking or score and so on and focusing too much on the ending does the rest of those elements a disservice but I also do agree that in the binge model of streaming shows where you can watch all episodes at once even a 14-part show does benefit one kind of consumption over another, I still want to do a test of watching a random Netflix show and watch the last episode first and so on. Can you enjoy something despite having spoilers? This I feel is an objectively impossible question to answer because you can't IRL Schrödinger cat watching the same movie. There can't be 2 of me watching the same movie with one version already knowing the ending and the other not and then comparing notes. The closest you could get around this is that if you told someone the incorrect ending or the movie had a different ending but still. Whilst I do love to wax lyrical on the nature of spoilers and consumption I feel these are the most fundamentally moot points when it comes to the trilogy of TV shows I decided to watch 10 years after being first aired, i.e. Breaking Bad /GoT/TWD since these movies were cultural touchstones and immensely popular having them being plot spoiled is just called being culturally aware. I'll start with GoT since that was the first show I was most aware before watching and being invested in its apparent downfall of the last season since shows ending badly will never not be funny. At uni, I saw a lot of posters of GoT maps and houses, family, and I already loved LOTR so I was always aware of the fundamental components of the show and that Ned Stark died season 1 and all the GoT parodies made out that the show just threw everyone into the meat grinder. I never watched video essays about any of these shows and funnily enough the only time I watched GoT live as it first aired was the Battle of Winterfell which I must say was the greatest battle ever filmed on a 3DS camera, truly remarkable work to see anything under those handheld conditions being lit up by a camera. Things and discourse I remember about GoT at the time was that Jon Snow was a bit of a lad and have joined the rugby society at uni and Hodor died holding a door and then would also DJ at your local student union events. I remember seeing people saying that the nudity was off-putting and was way overdone by in the early seasons, also that some of the actors used to be porn stars. The one serious piece of discourse I do remember at the time was the perceived overdone nature of the violence and all it forms and misogyny. I remember some people dropping the show after some changes from the book to the show. I remember people being very worried about the last 2 seasons since the book material ran out and I had the meme of Junior Martin doesn't finish anything drilled into my head and that the last book and finale will never be concluded. The ending being really bad and everyone speaking about it will always be one of those passive cultural memories, a true dropping of the ball, and when I did get around to watching it in 2022 the GoT didn't leave any impact discourse already took its spot and I always thought was a bit strange at the time mostly because I am unsure how many style of GoT are left to adapt and also these shows were massively expensive and took a long time to make and all the GoT clones at the time like the Viking shows were never going to reach any cultural zenith or peak. I do feel the GoT left no impact discourse did collide around the same time as Marvel exhaustion and the disdain towards binging content and buying merchandise is cringe and shameful kind of collided to memory hole GoT in the popular online space with some fans of GoT claiming to have never liked the show or that those grown out of it and now only like objectively cool and kino shows/movies that is the SAPRONOs, Twin Peaks, classic Simpsons, LOTR movies and Evangelion the only media you're allowed to show unabashed praise and affection for because to be honest they are actually all peak. I am still unsure if Breaking Bad is within this category because I feel the discourse surrounding Skyle White and the fanbase has kind of tainted the show in some way and Defo get back to that later but Better Call Saul might be approaching pure cool never cringe territory but it will take time to decide. Also something Ed Sheeran and Filch from Harry Potter being in the show. Onto actually watching GoT as stated before this is not a full review of GoT or even a half review but more did the show actually meet my expectations that was set upon it and was I surprised by the expectations versus reality. It does without saying I do think everyone should watch GoT under the expectation that you're universally not going to have a good time and statistically speaking your fave character will get shit canned. These don't really require bullet point but it helps make these part flow better into individual points. The last 2 seasons were not that bad but I do think binge watching them and not having to wait years on end did soften my opinion on them but also I just wanted it to end after the first 6 seasons and thinking well anything to get the job done better for me. I know the ending 2 seasons of GoT are very well documented on how it went wrong and yeah it probably did require at least another season to make it flow better and yes I did notice the writing was pretty bad overall but in hindsight I wish it was worse instead of the boring kind of bad it became. GoT really is the hoo-hoo of British soap acting. I was surprised how much religious elements were in the show and how much of that stuff outside the Red Witch didn't really get spoken about. The humor was especially from Tyrion really did add to the show, and his speech at the battle where they're clearly going to lose was an all-time classic, and he spit in at the trail as well. The only season I'd be interesting in RUA-TCHing would be the first one, and yes, that is because Sean Bean really does add gravity and skill his acting, and also it's the easiest and cleanest season to follow. I am still mixed on whether GoT did a good job of presenting its geographical realities. I am aware in the last 2 seasons the world map seemed to have shrunk by 50% and some armies discovered fast travel, but some locations and their geographic connections to each other did seem inconsistent or confusing. The show lore-wise did gel together pretty nicely, but the Crow and the Ice Children of the Tree did sometimes feel like it stuck out like a sore thumb, or just George R. Martin trying to combine and mash all elements of high and low fantasy together, and that plot conveniences sometimes do occur when a gritty fight scene is interrupted by supernaturalistic forces. If he does ever finish the last book, I might get around to audiobooking them all, and I have had Matt Poker Prince read me out the first page of the first book. In Season 1, when the person claimed to have seen the White Walker, what reason did he have to lie? The less said about the analogy/allegory of GoT to real-world history the better. And yes, I am looking forward to watching House of the Dragon Season 2, and Matt Smith does a really knock-up job in the first season.